Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in Acts chapter 7, verses 1 through 29. Then the high priest said, "Are these things true?" So he replied, "Brothers and fathers, listen to me. The God of glory appeared to our forefather Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he settled in Haran, and said to him, 'Go out from your country and from your relatives, and come to the land I will show you.' Then he went out from the country of the Chaldeans and settled in Haran. After his father died, God made him move to this country where you now live. He did not give any of it to him for an inheritance, not even a foot of ground. Yet God promised to give it to him as his possession, and to his descendants after him, even though Abraham as yet spoke as follows: 'Your descendants will be foreigners in a foreign country, whose citizens will enslave them and mistreat them for 400 years. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves,' said God. 'And after these things, they will come out of there and worship me in this place.' Then God gave Abraham the covenant of circumcision, and so he became the father of Isaac, and circumcised him when he was 8 days old. And Isaac became the father of Jacob, and Jacob of the 12 patriarchs. The patriarchs, because they were jealous of Joseph, sold him into Egypt. But God was with him, and rescued him from his troubles, and granted him favor and wisdom in the presence of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who made him ruler over Egypt and over all his household. Then a famine occurred throughout Egypt and Canaan, causing great suffering, and our ancestors could not find food. So when Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, he sent our ancestors there the first time. On their second visit, Joseph made himself known to his brothers again. His family became known to Pharaoh. So Joseph sent a message and invited his father Jacob and all his relatives to come, 75 people in all. So Jacob went down to Egypt and died there, along with our ancestors, and their bones were later moved to Shechem and placed in the tomb that Abraham had bought for a certain sum of money from the sons of Hamor in Shechem. But as the time drew near for God to fulfill the promise he had declared to Abraham, the people increased greatly in number in Egypt, until another king, who did not know about Joseph, ruled over Egypt. This was the one who exploited our people and was cruel to our ancestors, forcing them to. At that time Moses was born, and he was beautiful to God. For 3 months he was brought up in his father's house. And when he had been abandoned, Pharaoh's daughter adopted him and brought him up as her own son. So Moses was trained in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and was powerful in his words and deeds. But when he was about 40 years old, it entered into his mind to visit his fellow countrymen, the Israelites. When he saw one of them being hurt unfairly, Moses came to his defense, and avenged the person who was mistreated by striking down the Egyptian. He thought his own people would understand that God was delivering them through him, but they did not understand. The next day Moses saw 2 men fighting, and tried to make peace between them, saying, 'Men, you are brothers, why are you hurting one another?' But the man who was unfairly hurting his neighbor pushed Moses aside, saying, 'Who made you ruler and judge over us? You don't want to kill me the way you killed the Egyptian yesterday, do you?' When the man said this, Moses fled and became a foreigner in the land of Midian, where he became the father of 2 sons. So, this is Stephen giving his defense before the priestly council. In chapter 6, Stephen was appointed as one of these overseers who would who would make sure that everybody was getting their portion of food correctly. And nobody was getting skipped over. But along with this, you had Stephen, who was able to preach, and in Acts 6, verse 10, they were not able to resist the wisdom and the spirit with which he spoke. But they've incited some men against him, saying that he was a blasphemer. And so they drug him before the council, and the high priest says, "Are these things true?" And Stephen lays out this defense here, which doesn't sound like a defense to me, just in that he's laying out the entire history of Israel at this point, where he's starting back at Abraham, and from there going to Joseph, and then to Moses, and further on I guess just stays at Moses. But it's interesting how, as part of this, he just is laying out the history of Israel, and at the end of it, they kill him for it. Then the high priest said, from Guzik here, the high priest mentioned here was probably still Caiaphas, the same one who presided over the trial of Jesus. Are these things so? The high priest invited Stephen to explain himself in light of the accusations recorded in Acts 6:11 through 14. Stephen was accused of speaking blasphemous words against Moses and God, and against this holy place, the temple and the law. Additionally, they accused him of saying that Jesus would destroy both the temple and the customs delivered by Moses. In his response, Stephen gave a panorama of Old Testament history. We shouldn't think Stephen instructed the Sanhedrin on points of Jewish history they were ignorant of. Instead, Stephen emphasized some things in Jewish history they may not have considered, that God never confined himself to one place, like the temple, and that the Jewish people had a habit of rejecting those God sends to them. This really was not a defense. Stephen wasn't interested in defending himself. He simply wanted to proclaim the truth about Jesus in a way people could understand. He was apparently not making a special defense at all, or with one syllable referring to his accusers and their false witnesses. He is yet utterly refuting them and making the most effective defense, from Lenski. Stephen seems to have perceived that the old order of things was passing away, and a new order was coming. This becomes particularly clear when he talks about the temple. It was cherished by the Jews, but it was destined to pass away, and Stephen seems to have sensed that. His speech is a transition that paves the way for presenting the gospel to the Gentiles, which begins in the very next chapter of Acts, from Boise. Such a speech as this was by no means calculated to ensure an acquittal before the Sanhedrin. It is rather a defense of pure Christianity as God's appointed way of worship, from Bruce. Yeah. Which is interesting. Rather than seeking to clear up the misunderstanding of him, or rather the false charges of him blaspheming, he seeks to make a defense for Christianity. At the very beginning, Stephen emphasized that the God of glory appeared to Abraham before he even came into the promised land. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia. Not only was the temple unnecessary for this revelation of the God of glory, the promised land itself was not necessary. Whoa. God was greater than either, and this explained how Stephen was falsely accused of speaking against the temple. Stephen wasn't defending, he simply explained. A single thread runs through the first part of his defense. It is that the God of Israel is a pilgrim God, who is not restricted to any one place. If he has any home on earth, it is with his people that he lives, from Stott. So it is not as if Abraham was in Mesopotamia, and God, perhaps from Mount Zion, many hundreds of miles away, shouted to him, "Abraham, come over here. I want you to come to Palestine." Rather, God appeared to him right there in Mesopotamia in all his glory, from Boise. Get out of your country and from your relatives and come to a land that I will show you. God said this to Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia. Yet Stephen explained that Abraham did not immediately go to Canaan. He dwelt in Haran, and he did not immediately leave his relatives. His father came with him to Haran. Abraham's partial obedience did not take God's promise away. Instead, it meant the promise was on hold until Abraham was ready to do what the Lord said. The fulfillment of the promise didn't progress until Abraham left Haran and his father behind and went to the place God wanted him to go. A little dog here. Camera's a little bit high. There you go. Let's see here. Abraham will certainly become a giant of faith, even being the father of the believing. Yet he did not start there. Abraham is an example of one who grew in faith and obedience. And God gave him no inheritance, no child. Abraham was promised both the land and descendants, but he had no outward proof of either. He could only trust God for the fulfillment of these things. With this, Stephen emphasized a relationship with God on the basis of faith, and not outward evidences like a temple or the structure of institutional religion and its customs. Even when Abraham was in the land, he was a pilgrim. He didn't make an idol out of the blessings God had either given or promised. This was a rebuke to the religious leaders Stephen spoke to, because many among them had stopped being pilgrims, and they made idols out of the blessings of the temple and the land. Yeah, and I think that's a natural thing for us to do, as evidenced by a lot of the stories in the Old Testament, where things that God has made or has established end up being taken, and us taking them out of their proper position and elevating them to a place of supreme importance, rather than looking to the God who made those things. For example, here you have the temple of the Lord being highly prized, elevated to a place that it didn't belong in. That's not to say, of course, that the temple isn't important. It shows, well, it acts as an analogy, a simile, I guess, of how we approach God. God is separate from everything else, and that we need to approach him with sacrifice. In this case, the sacrifice of Jesus Christ on the cross. Yeah, so it is important, but it was elevated to a place of supreme importance in Jewish thinking in that day. And even prior to that, I think it was, I'm not sure, in one of the prophets where they were like, the temple of the Lord, thinking that Israel wouldn't get punished because it had the temple of the Lord present. But the temple of the Lord wasn't as important to the Lord as hearts that are willing to serve him type thing. And likewise, there's other things as well, like the Ark of the Covenant, that the people believed that they could take into battle with the Philistines, and rather than getting right with God, just use the Ark of the Covenant as a magic charm. And they were soundly defeated, despite that. And likewise, too, I think we can take outward acts of religious good and turn that into something that is elevated beyond its place. We can act as though God owes us for the good that we do, when that's not what God wants. We can't benefit him in that way. though it is good to do good things, type thing. So, yeah. It's important to recognize that it's God that's the most important thing. And these other secondary things are good in themselves, but not when they're elevated to a place of idolatrous importance. So, his descendants would dwell in a foreign land, into bondage. The promise would not be easy or light for Abraham or his descendants. Yet God promised to judge the nation that put Israel into bondage. Stephen here suggested that the idea that God knows how to take care of and protect his people. He rested in that assurance himself and challenged the council to have the same assurance. He gave him the covenant of circumcision. Isaac begot Jacob, and Jacob begot the 12 patriarchs. Circumcision became the sign of the covenant for Israel, and the covenant was passed down through these descendants of Abraham. God was with him. Again, Stephen emphasized the spiritual presence of God with Joseph at all the time. Joseph did not need to go to the temple to be close to God. There was no temple. Instead, God was with him all the time. Becoming envious, they sold Joseph. Stephen mentioned the story of Joseph because he is a picture of Jesus, and that the sons of Israel rejected Joseph, who later became a savior to them, and the only possible savior. 75 people. Genesis 46:27 says that there were 70 altogether of the family of Israel. When Stephen in Acts 7:14 said it was 75, Stephen quoted from the Septuagint version of the Old Testament, which says 75. The number in the Septuagint is not wrong, just arrived at in a different way, specifically adding 5 more sons or grandsons of Joseph born in Egypt. The tomb that Abraham bought. The only land that Abraham ever actually possessed in Canaan was this burial plot. The rest was received only by faith. At this time, Moses was born and was well-pleasing to God. Moses was also like Jesus in that he was favored by God from birth and preserved in childhood as well. He was well-pleasing to God, without the temple or the customs of institutional religion. He was mighty in words and deeds. Moses was also like Jesus, who would come after him, in that he was wise, skillful with words, and a man of mighty deeds. When he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brethren. At an appointed time, Moses came down from his royal throne, out of care and concern for his brethren. This was another way that Moses was like Jesus, who would come after him. He supposed that his brethren would have understood that God would deliver them by his hand, but they did not understand. Offered deliverance to Israel, he was rejected, and rejected with spite. Israel denied that he had any right to be a ruler and a judge over them. Stephen's message was plain. You have rejected Jesus, who was like Moses, yet greater than him, and you deny that Jesus has any right to be a ruler and a judge over you. Yeah. Yeah. Rather than accept the God who put all these things into place, they chose to love the things that he put into place rather than him, and so rejected him. So, yeah, I've got my dog in faithful attendance here. But she likes to sit on my lap. So, carrying on. Psalm 127, verses 1 through 5. If the Lord does not build a house, then those who build it work in vain. If the Lord does not guard a city, then the watchman stands guard in vain. It is vain for you to rise early, come home late, and work so hard for your food. Yes, he can provide for those whom he loves, even when they sleep. Yes, sons are a gift from the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Sons born during one's youth are like arrows in a warrior's hand. How blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. They will not be put to shame when they confront enemies at the city gate. Yeah. So, this to me highlights the importance of whatever you do, doing it for the Lord. And however you work at it with all your heart, as if working for the Lord and not for men. Ultimately, everything in creation is going to fade away. It's all going to turn to dust, and we should be more concerned about things that last than things that don't last. And only what's done for Christ will last. So, let's make an effort to do what we do for Christ. From Guzik here. This psalm is titled A Song of Ascents of Solomon. Most believe Solomon to be the author, yet it is possible that the psalm was composed by David for Solomon. Here, Solomon will be considered the author. The strength of the Hebrew people in the past, and all that remains of it today, largely results from the keen sense, which they ever cherished, of the importance of the home and the family. The house, the city, labor, are all important to the conserving of the strength of the family. From Morgan. Unless the Lord builds the house, Solomon understood that the work of man had its place, but it was of little ultimate use without the work and blessing of God. Without God's work and blessing, they labor in vain who build it. No house building is successful out of account. How have we seen men build only houses with care, and at great cost, only to see them crumble to pieces because God was forgotten? From Morgan. A Latin motto says, Nisi Dominus Frusta. It comes from the first words of this psalm and means, without the Lord, frustration. It is the motto of the city of Edinburgh, Scotland, appearing on its crest, and it is affixed to the city's official documents. It could be attached to the lives of many who are trying to live their lives without the Almighty. From Boise. It is possible that the house built here is actually a family. It may also signify the raising of a family, especially because this section precedes a unit in which the family is emphasized as a reward from the Lord. In the Old Testament, it is usual to speak of a family as a house, even as we speak of a prominent family as a dynasty. From Van Gemeren. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman has his role and should stay awake, but God's work and blessing are needed to truly guard the city. Yeah, this isn't just a, God's got it all under control, so I should stop working and let God do what he wills. I don't believe that that's the right approach, because, we're admonished to do good and to disobey God by fatalistically leaving it up to us taking the easy route out of lethargy, I would say in that case, is wrong. Builds the house, guards the city. It's especially meaningful that Solomon wrote this psalm, because he knew what it was like to both build a house and guard a city. Wise Solomon understood that though God welcomed and even commanded human effort and participation, his work and blessing were more important. These would be splendid words to cut into granite over the entrance to all our homes, and to emblazon in gold in all the meeting places of those in civic authority. But better still, let them be written in the heart of those who make homes and guard and govern cities. From Morgan. From Spurgeon, note that the psalmist does not bid the builder cease from laboring, nor suggest that watchmen should neglect their duty, nor that men should show their trust in God by doing nothing. Nay, he supposes that they can do, and then he forbids their fixing their trust in what they have done, and assures them that all creature effort will be in vain unless the Creator puts forth his power. They, above all men, ought to implore the divine grace and benediction who are employed either in building or defending the spiritual house and city of God. From Horn. It is vain for you to rise up early. we gather that Solomon did not speak against hard work, because several of his proverbs praise the hard worker who rises early. From the first verse of this psalm, we understand that Solomon intended the trust many put in their hard work and the anxiety that showed reliance on self, not God. For you, he directs his speech to the persons forementioned, the builders or watchmen, of both which sorts following course. But the psalmist decries this as an inferior way of life, if the hard work is only for the purpose of providing daily food and clothing for oneself and the family. The higher way of life begins with trusting the Lord in one's work. From Van Gemeren. From Maclaren, long hours do not mean prosperous work. The evening meal may be put off till a late hour, and when the toil-worn man sits down to eat it, he may eat bread made bitter by labor, but all is in vain without God's blessing. The bread of sorrows, living a life of misery and labors, fretting at their own disappointments, eaten up with envy at the advancement of others, afflicted overmuch with losses and wrongs. There is no end of all their labors. From Manton. For so he gives his beloved sheep, on their own work, experience the anxiety that comes with it. God's blessing is to give his loved ones sleep. They can be at peace knowing that God's hand is at work, and his eye watches even as they sleep. The labors of mankind, first in building houses and cities, and then in guarding and securing their possessions, are undergone not with a view to themselves alone, but to their families, which they would establish and perpetuate. From Horn. Children are a heritage from the Lord. Solomon considered the wisdom of trusting God in building a house, but he also understood that a home is built by more than bricks and wood. He called upon all to see that children are a blessing. The Jew would ask, why is the house being built if it is not for the family? And why are it for the families that live in it? Then, as now, the family was the basic unit and the most important element of society. From Boise. Let the fruitful family, however poor, lay this to heart. Children are a heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. And he who gave them will feed them. For it is a fact, and the maxim formed on it has never failed, wherever God sends mouths, he sends meat. From Clark. He gives children not as a penalty, nor as a burden, but as a favor, if men know how to receive them and educate them. They are doubtful blessings, only because we are doubtful persons. From Spurgeon. And certainly a different perspective on childbearing than is popular today, where children are viewed more as a curse rather than a blessing. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Sadly, though Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines, we know of only one of his specific descendants. Perhaps Solomon knew very little of this reward. This last was a fit lesson for Solomon, who, by so many wives and concubines, left but only one son that we read of, and him not of the wisest. From Trapp. Like much of Solomon's wisdom, the lesson of this psalm, relevant as they were to his situation, were mostly lost on him. Both literal and figurative, became reckless. His kingdom a ruin, and his marriage a disastrous denial of God. From Kibner. The arrows in the hand of a warrior. In many ways, children are like arrows in the hand of a warrior. They must be carefully shaped and formed, guided with skill and strength, given care or they will not fly straight. They must be aimed and given direction. They will not find direction on their own. They are, in some respects, extension of the warrior's strength and accomplishment, and they have potential for much good or evil. This similitude importeth that children must have more in them than nature, for arrows are no arrows by growth, but by art, so they must be such children, the naughtiness of whose nature is refined and reformed, and made smooth by grace, and then they are cared for. From Trapp. We shall see them shot forth into life, to our comfort and delight, if we take care from the very beginning that they are directed to the right point. From Spurgeon. Happy is the man who has a quiver full of them, If children are a reward, then there is a great blessing and happiness in having many children. Who has his quiver full of them? Who hath a numerous issue, which as it is a great blessing in itself, so Solomon's want of it made it more valuable in his eyes. From Poole. From Spurgeon, a quiver may be small and yet full, and then the blessing is obtained. In any case, we may be sure that a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of children that he possesseth. Nice, thanks, Spurgeon. Many children make many prayers, and many prayers bring much blessing. From Spurgeon. But shall speak with their enemies in the gate. The gates of an ancient city were a place of business and justice. This verse speaks of children of the godly having places of prominence and influence in their communities. From Spurgeon, nobody cares to meddle with a man who can gather a clan of brave sons about him. From Maclaren, the gate was the place where justice was administered, and where was the chief place of concourse. It is therefore improbable that actual warfare is meant, rather in the dispute which might arise with neighbors, and in the intercourse of city life, which would breed enmity. The man with his sons about him could hold his own, and such blessing is God's gift. And finally, Proverbs chapter 16, verses 28 through 30. A perverse person spreads dissension, and a gossip separates the closest friends. A violent person entices his neighbor and leads him down a path that is terrible. The one who winks his eyes devises perverse things. And one who compresses his lips brings about evil. Yeah. A few proverbs concerning a tongue used inappropriately. One by a perverse person, one by a violent person, and one who winks his eye. The idea with the last one being a tricksy type person. Yeah, the result of which is gossip that separates the closest friends. The leading of someone is terrible, and one who brings about evil. So, important to not be those things. Twisted, perverse people love to sow strife the way a farmer sows seed. When there is much strife, there is some perverse person sowing the strife. Best of friends. This is one way that the perverse man sows strife, by whispering gossipy words. The strife they sow is so powerful that it can separate the best of friends. Often such people show they are perverse because they count it a victory and accomplishment to sow such strife and to separate even the best of friends. Whisperer denotes a malicious gossip who misrepresents a situation and by his calumny aims to besmirch and to defame others behind their backs. In 17:9, the talebearer also implicitly repeats a matter without confronting the wrongdoer directly. A violent man entices his neighbor. The violent man does this by encouraging partnership in his violent works, or by inviting a violent response from his neighbor. He leads him in a way that is not good. Violence often leads to a way that is not good. Sometimes the threat or presence of strength is necessary to prevent violence, but often violence leads to a way that is not good. He winks his eye to devise perverse things. This is likely connected to the previous verse. The violent man of Proverbs 16:29 may entice his neighbor as he winks his eye, treating it as a light and clever thing to do, to devise perverse things. Wicked men are great students. They beat their brains and close their eyes that they may revolve and excogitate mischief with more freedom of mind. They search the devil's skull for new devices and are very inventive to invent that which may do harm. From Trap. He purses his lip and brings about evil. With expressions of contempt, the violent man brings about evil. He does not seriously consider the bad effects of his actions. Who are planning wicked things betray themselves with malicious expressions. Two expressions are depicted here, winking the eye and pursing the lip, and reveal whether someone is plotting something evil. From Ross. Yeah. Best to have our hearts filled with God rather than with malicious schemes. Anyhow, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day.